Welcome to the Blurb. I'm your host, Glenn Porzig. On this episode, we'll be discussing a book that can be described as Portal Fantasy plus your favorite video game. This episode of the Blurb is sponsored by Graphic Entertainment. Go to graphicentertainment.com/Among the Titans for out of this world science fiction. Born and raised in Cincinnati, Ohio, Stuart Thaman graduated from Hillsdale College with degrees in politics and German, and has since sworn off life in the cold North. Now comfortably settled in Kentucky, he lives with his lovely wife, a rambunctious Boston Terrier named Yoda, and 4 cats who probably hate him. When not writing, he enjoys smoking cigars, acquiring bruises in mosh pits, and preparing for the end of the world. I'd like to welcome author Stuart Thaman to the Blurb.
How's it going?
Hey, pretty good. Glad to have you.
Thanks for having me on.
I just finished listening to one of your audiobooks, so
awesome.
It's nice to have you on.
Yeah, good to be here.
All right. You've got a new book you're going to be talking about today. Would you care to share the blurb with us?
Yeah, so the new book is Realm Online is the name of the series. This will be the first installment of the series called Oathbreaker and should be coming out in the spring. In the blurb, Steve's just an accountant with a barely controlled MMO addiction. Bacta, an outcast blood mage, lives in Tamrinnil, a starter village in the MMO realm of crafted war. The people of Realm live under the harsh rule of a vile bureaucrat, and Bacta just might have a plan to save them all. She'll need to summon a powerful Oathbreaker, one she's been watching through a scrying mirror for quite some time. There's only one hitch. Max Krenar, the level 90 Oathbreaker, isn't real. He's just Steve's character. Violently dragged into the world of Tamrinnil, Steve will have to learn how the hell he's supposed to survive, all while masquerading as Max Krenar, the demon Oathbreaker he's supposed to be. And that is the blurb for book 1 of the Realm Online series.
Oh, sounds pretty cool. The Realm Online, that's the series name. What's the title of the book?
Yeah, so book 1 is Oathbreaker, and
Oathbreaker.
book 2 will be Citadel Deathgaze is the title of that one.
Oh, already got a title for book 2. So.
Oh yeah, we're cranking on it already. So
Cool. I just listened to Respawn, which was also a LitRPG book. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Respawn's doing really well. Easily my best-selling audiobook, but one of my personal favorites of mine as well.
Cool. When you were coming up with this latest book, did you have any working titles, or did you know the title right from the beginning?
Actually, I had a couple different titles. So originally the book has been posted chapter by chapter on Royal Road, which is like the big serial website for lit RPGs. And I posted it up there just to get feedback from people, see what they liked, what they didn't like, so I can change it and make it as good as possible. And trying to remember exactly, the first title was Trapped instead of Oathbreaker. But Trapped just felt like almost all the other lit RPG titles out there. It was a little too tropey and too blunt, I think. So it was actually a fan of the series online that recommended the Oathbreaker title, so went with that.
Cool. So obviously this sounds like it's going to be lit RPG. Again.
Definitely. Yep.
Is this cross-genre any? Would it fall into any other genres?
Yeah, so it's got, the main is lit RPG, epic fantasy type, or portal fantasy as people call it. So the main trope that it really plays on is the regular everyday guy stuck in the fantasy world and has to survive there. Book 1 does have a little bit of harem elements, as people call it. I'm sort of new to that kind of subgenre as well, but with the cover, you've got the Steve in the middle there and 2 beautiful fantasy women on either side. So he's got that sort of fan base of followers that follow him around. And there's a little bit of sort of romance subplot and harem qualities, which, again, I'll stress I am new to writing that genre. So it's a little bit out of the box from my perspective, but it has been fun. It's been a good challenge to write.
And it's definitely a big selling point for especially lit RPG these days.
Yeah, a lot of people really like that element. So if that's what the people want, that's what they shall receive.
Yep. Do you write any other genres?
So I've tried my hand at thrillers, and I've written 2 thrillers. They both had been published quite a long time ago. And the first one is truly, truly terrible. And it was just awful. And it was actually my first ever publishing contract. And I spent about 3 seconds deliberating whether or not I should go with it. And it was just bad all around. But luckily, that book is dead. It's no longer in print or online. It is gone. It's buried. And will never see the light of day again. And I have one other thriller out right now, and that one I'm actually in the process of trying to rewrite because I realize I don't really like the book that much, and thrillers are really hard. So I'm a fantasy guy. That's what I do, and I like to read thrillers. I like to watch thrillers, but for whatever reason, I cannot write them. So I have written one dark fantasy. I've got a dark fantasy series, but that's as close as I'll get to anything outside of fantasy again. And it really looks like LitRPG is going to be where I'm going to live for probably the next 20 years, it seems.
Cool. Well, I enjoyed Respawn, and you did a lot of world building in that, and it seemed like, it seemed like that's maybe where you belong. Just 'cause you were able to put so much into that.
Yeah, there's a lot. It's a huge world that you get to play with in both sort of like the real world aspects plus a video game design and all that stuff's just a ton of fun. It's been great.
Cool. Obviously this is LitRPG that you're doing, the new book, Portal Fantasy, I think you called it. So this question I like to ask may not fit so well, but if you were going to give an elevator pitch, kind of like it's this meets this kind of thing, would that apply to this?
Yeah, I think you could. So it's basically like like Portal Fantasy people like to describe as Chronicles of Narnia kind of idea, which is a really great example of one of the earliest, forms of the genre. And so you get that aspect of these irregular people in a fantasy realm going on adventures, that kind of stuff, which definitely is, a good half or better of the LitRPG genre. And then just plus your favorite video game. So it's kind of like if you were in your favorite video game, what do you like to play? And now you can kind of play it through a book, which is really, really cool.
Cool. So what was the spark, the thing that got the ball rolling on this new series?
So the new series really grew out of Killstreak and Respawn. So with that series, which book 2 of that series will be coming out around the same time this summer, but I really wrote the first LitRPG series of mine with Killstreak and the first book, Respawn, as a sort of test market to see like, hey, if I write this LitRPG, put it out there, are fans going to like it? Are people going to like it? And there's going to be things they don't like. How do I fix those? Throw it into a new series that's really what people want to read. And so I wrote Killstreak as an entire just test market series and did really well, did beat my expectations by a lot, got a lot of really, really good feedback, was able to change editors partially because of some of the feedback from it as well to really get the LitRPG style locked down. And then basically just had the idea of I wanted to make a world that's a little more defined. So in Respawn, we see the characters after they've been in the game world for 30 years. And here I wanted to illustrate what the characters like beforehand, before they go into the fantasy realm, and give you a look into their daily life. And Steve's just a boring, like low-level accountant. He works in a cubicle farm. He hates his boss. He's a really relatable guy. And just, he lives for playing Realm when he goes home because it's his only release, like, a lot of us. And so he goes home, he starts playing Realm again, and then gets summoned, and it actually rips him through the floor of his apartment. And then he just wakes up and in this fantasy world, and it's like, oh shit, like here it goes, get ready. And really like adding that aspect to the LitRPG, brings it alive a lot more, makes you connect a lot more to the characters. And so really the whole series idea was just spawned from that single concept that I got after writing Respawn.
Cool. So it sounds like, I mean, you obviously have written a lot of fantasy to begin with, but and you said Respawn was kind of a, exploration, or you did some studying about
it was
RPG.
a test. Yep.
So was there any other research that went into this book in particular? And as part of that, did you discover anything that surprised you?
Yeah, so the first thing, I heard about LitRPG when two things: when Ready Player One, the movie, came out, which I still haven't seen, but when that came out and I read the synopsis, I like to read movie synopses or synopses, mainly because I just don't have much time. So I read the synopsis, and it's kind of like watching it, right? So I read that, and I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. And then one of my friends, Hugo Huesca, released Dungeon Lord, and I read Dungeon Lord. I read the first one, and I read it partially because he's one of my friends. I wanted to read his book, and partially because it was doing so massively well online. And I read it, and the biggest surprise was I really like the genre. And it was like eye-opening to see, like, there's a video game I can read. That's awesome. That's two things I love to do. I read all the time. I play video games all the time. If I can do them at the same time, it's just, it's twice as good. And that was a huge bit of research that I did, was really reading the Dungeon Lord series, the other series that Hugo has, Rune Universe, reading that. And then there's another one called Life Reset. That's the one. I can't remember the author's name because I think it's like Russian and it's really complex. But Life Reset, I've listened to that audiobook, and that gave me another idea for what people really like in LitRPG. And that one's basically all just world building. There's really nothing else. It's just the main character building a settlement in a video game and reading about how they go about doing all that kind of element. Because that's actually an element I don't really like in LitRPG, is the settlement building aspect. I like a lot more combat and action and, sort of swords flying and death right around the corner. But readers like both. So using that Life Reset book as a research has been huge and really, really helpful.
Anything you want to share about the setting of the new book?
Yeah, so it's pretty cool. The setting is sort of on two continents. They end up crossing the continents about halfway through or so. And then the second continent they go to, the first one is really a standard sort of fantasy RPG setting where you've got, towns and villages, the king, the guards, all that kind of fun stuff. And then they go to the second village, which really, or the second continent rather, has one like major city, and then outside of it is just ruins, and the ruins have sort of been taken over by all sorts of other creatures and people, hungry for power and whatnot. And on the second continent, there are dinosaurs. So it is a fully Jurassic themed they make frequent references to Jurassic Park movies and various scenes as well, but there are full-on dinosaurs. One of the big bad guys of the second half of the book is a T-Rex. So it adds a fun new fantasy element to it as well.
Yeah, sounds pretty cool. Now, without giving us too many spoilers, tell us a little bit more about your main character.
Yeah, so the main character, Steve, he's just sort of your average everyday guy. He's got a mountain of student loan debt. He's broke. He's living in a shitty apartment. He had to steal an office chair from work, all that kind of good stuff. His only real friends are the people he knows online that he hangs out with all the time there. One of which is actually a coworker of his who ends up becoming a really, really important character to the whole story. Sort of his best friend, Braden, who's the stereotypical frat boy kind of image, and very bro-ish, as he's described in the book many times. So the two of them sort of haphazardly making their way through the fantasy realm, using all the knowledge they've gained through years of playing Realm online at their desks after work. And so all the knowledge they have really helps, since they're now in the world, but they're definitely not very good at applying it. They're not the most physically fit specimens by any means, and not really apt to killing. And a huge moment really in the book is when Steve has to actually take his first human life. And even though his life is in danger, he's being threatened, he realizes he's the bad guy. And as the title would suggest, he's an Oathbreaker, and that's the character he played online, is sort of the bad guy, and that's who summons him. They're not good. They're very evil people, and so he has to come to terms with that and figure out what that means for him, and if he actually has the strength and the stomach to kill people and to really kill humans. And it's a big moment for him.
That's a really interesting aspect there. It's one thing to play a character like that online, and it's another to actually do it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting from my own perspective. I've played evil characters. I've played D&D campaigns as evil characters, all sorts of things. And you think about, would you do this in real life? Even if you had that motivation, would you do it? And it's a fun little thought experiment.
Very cool. Very cool. So did you have anyone in mind when you were writing, Steve, or do you have an actor, either living or dead, you think would be good for him if they were to make a movie or something?
Oh, that's a tough question. Man. I think all my favorite actors are probably too old. I mean, maybe a really young Clint Eastwood.
Okay.
I could see that. Or even honestly, like Tom Cruise from Top Gun, where I mean, he's not the most physically fit guy, perhaps, because he's a little bit shorter and whatnot, not, you know, necessarily an athletic specimen, but maybe a pudgier Tom Cruise from Top Gun would work well.
Okay, that's cool. So, fans of what other series or author do you think this new book would appeal to?
It should have, I really hope it has mass appeal to pretty much any lit RPG fans, especially the Dungeon Lord series. My writing style, I think, is really, really similar to Hugo's. He said that about my stuff too, so hopefully it's true. But anybody that likes the dinosaur stuff from Tamer by Michael Scott Earley, he's written a whole bunch of lit RPG with dinosaurs, and I kind of sort of piggybacked off of those tropes in that setting a little bit as well. So all the really top end mainstream lit RPG stuff, if people have read that, they definitely feel right at home with Realm.
All right. Now we're going to go into a little bit of the authors and the media and stuff. Obviously,
Sure.
you've talked about people that have inspired this book directly, but just overall, as far as being an author, any authors that really inspired you to get into writing?
Yeah, so the first author that really got me into reading first, obviously, a first step there was Orson Scott Card, and it was, I think I was 15 years old, and my mom had bought me. And my mom's not a reader, as a first off caveat, but she bought me a copy of Ender's Game because she saw it at Barnes and Noble, and it was on a table that was like what teens are reading today or something like that, and she thought it looked interesting. Whatever, she bought it. I'm not even sure why she was in a bookstore. She doesn't read. My brother read a little bit. He read thrillers, and he read a lot of Tom Clancy. I never read at all, and my mom gave it to me as a gift. It probably sat on my nightstand for maybe 6 months or something. Finally, I was bored and I couldn't sleep one night, so I picked it up and I started reading. It was like just this crazy moment of there's a whole world out here that I can, you know, teleport to whenever I want, and it was amazing. And from that moment on, I've been reading, you know, nonstop my entire life. So however many years ago that actually was, I really can't remember, but Orson Scott Card is sort of the impetus of all of it. And then I actually started to type my own first book when I was reading an interview with David Dalglish, who's a really good fantasy author that I like a lot. And he used to be independent. He got picked up by, I think, by Orbit. But one of the big publishers out there got picked up by them, and has been doing really well ever since. And I read an interview with him where they talked about, like, you know, how'd you get started writing? And he said he was working the drive-through, I think, of a Burger King, and he was like 28 years old or something like that. And he's got, you know, like a college degree, and he's just doing nothing with his life, working at this fast food drive-through. And he said, "Hey, I've read a lot of fantasy. I can write this shit." And he started writing it, and his first books are amazing. They're absolutely some of my all-time favorite fantasy books. And I remember reading that interview, and I was living in my mom's basement at the time, and I thought to myself, well, if he was working at a fast food drive-through and wrote these awesome fantasy books, I could do that. And I started writing fantasy. So that was
That's
it.
awesome. That's
Yeah.
awesome. All right. Well, obviously, you're reading for some research. Is there any reading that you have time to do just for fun?
Yeah, I always try. I mean, I'm usually reading probably 5 or 6 books at once. You can probably see behind me, this is maybe a third or so of my basement library that I've got going on. I collect a lot of old books as well, and I like to collect a lot of philosophy is really what my sort of main passion is outside of fantasy as well. So I've got a ton of that. Right now, I'm actually reading Bird Box. So just watched the movie, as apparently the rest of the world has as well. And reading the book right now is pretty solid. It's really interesting. Reading a couple others, War of the Worlds, reading that right now. Just about maybe 20 or so percent into that. And just finished Portrait of Dorian Gray, which I really, really liked. That's one of my all-time favorites now. That was a fantastic book that I'd had on my shelf forever, and had just never really gotten around to picking up, and really, really enjoyed that one.
No, that's cool. You mentioned Bird Box. Any other movies that you particularly liked or TV shows that you're currently watching?
I mean, my favorite TV show is probably Battlestar Galactica, the new one, or else Stranger Things. I like both of those quite a bit. I like the shows that make you think a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
and that are a little more complex, perhaps. Other than that, I mean, Bird Box I thought was really solid. The movie was extremely well done. I mean, it's got a phenomenal cast, so it really you can't put all those people together and make a bad product. I really liked that, but my all-time favorite movie is actually a superhero movie, which for me is a little rare because I'm not a huge fan of superhero stuff. But Constantine, the movie from, I don't know if it's like 2003 or something like that, but some time ago now, that is my all-time favorite movie because I love philosophy, I love theology, and that movie, if you really think about it and you don't just watch it for a cool, guns and action movie, it can really ask some preposterously deep questions that, stick with you for years and years. And I love that movie for it.
Yeah, that was a really good movie. I really enjoyed that, and I really wanted to like the TV show. Did you get to watch the TV show?
Yeah, I saw a little, and I just didn't really like it. And the movie's just so good for me. I don't really want to take the risk of watching more of the TV show. Yep.
Well, for me, the TV show was like, it got to the final 2 episodes, and I was like, all right, it hit its stride, and then it was over.
Yeah.
It was like, finally what I wanted to see.
Yeah.
All right. You mentioned philosophy. Do you have any other strange or unusual hobbies?
Yeah, I mean that's the big one. So I actually have a degree in classical political philosophy. So that is my like academic specialty. I teach a course in classical philosophy. Designed the curriculum. I wrote the textbook for it. So it is sort of my like big passion is the old school classic political guys. Really love all that stuff. Other weird hobbies. I mean, I'm a pretty strange guy. Probably my next biggest hobby is probably just cigars because I can smoke a cigar while I do anything else. So I like to sit on my back porch and smoke a cigar while I write when it's warm enough, or just sit out and read. And it's just a fun pastime that you can do while doing all the other things.
Oh, that's cool. So if you weren't a writer, obviously that's taking a lot of your time now. If you weren't a writer, what do you think you would end up doing? Or would have ended up?
I have no idea. I always wanted to be military when I was growing up, and that's my whole family is military history and everything. And my grandpa is the big male influence in my life, and he was career military himself until he died. So always wanted that, and ended up getting sidelined because I broke my elbow when I was 16 and had a full elbow replacement and reconstruction and everything. 2 surgeries and 5 years of physical therapy. So put me out of commission on that end, but. If I could, I would still do that. I would definitely. I was ready to go, and I had interviewed at VMI and the Citadel and University of the Marine Corps, and taken the ASVAB and all the entrance tests and everything, and was ready to go. And it was actually February of my senior year. The Department of Defense called me. One of their surgeons called me and told me that I was disqualified for my arm. So it was kind of a major change in life plan, career plan, all that kind of thing. So ended up obviously not going to a military college, wasn't allowed, couldn't even do ROTC or anything like that. And that's when I started studying philosophy because that's what I liked. So, yeah.
That was quite a change. I can see that.
Yeah, huge change. Yeah, definitely.
So if you had one piece of advice for an aspiring writer, what do you think it would be?
I think the best advice that I ever heard was actually from another writer. I think you might have met her, AJ Scudieri. You've probably seen her around some of the conventions. Yeah. It was actually, I think, either the first or second convention I ever did was one in Indiana, and she was there giving a talk, and I was listening to it, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. I had never really done anything before. I think I had 2 books out, and they were both terrible. So she actually gave the best writer's advice that I've heard, which was take your phone and throw it in the ocean. And it's beautiful advice. And it really, if you just remove the distractions, anybody can be a writer. And I think it might even be a Stephen King quote where he said something like, all you have to do to be a writer is sit down and write, or something like that. I'm paraphrasing terribly, but just the concept of tuning out all the other stuff and sitting down with an hour and just putting your mind to it and actually writing is huge. And I know a lot of writers or aspiring writers that have asked me similar questions. They're like, hey, like, I just can't get this book started, or I can't get this book finished, or I just don't know what to do here. And I'll tell them all the time, just skip the scene that you're stuck on and write the rest of them and come back and you'll finish it. You'll know how, in a month when you're done with the whole manuscript.
Yeah,
that's been huge for me.
I do the same thing. If I'm stuck on something, I just move ahead and you go back to it when the time's right.
Yeah, and I found a couple times where I don't even have to go back, and it's like, hey, this time skip here actually works well. That scene I was stuck on probably would be boring.
Cool. So the new book is Oathbreaker, Is that right? And if readers do enjoy this book, what other book would you recommend?
Of mine, of course, Kill Streak is my other lit RPG. And when Oathbreaker drops, it'll actually be dropping the same week as book 2, as Citadel Death Gaze. So they'll be able to go right into the meat of the series and hit book 2 right away. Book 3, hopefully later this year, or well, this year, later in 2019. But yeah, hopefully 2019 is going to be a big year for me. I've got 5 books on the slate to be released, so going to be extremely busy and very productive, hopefully. But my Kill Streak is my other lit RPG, and then my favorite story that I've ever written or ever told is Shadowlith, and that's just a 2-part series, with the second part hopefully being one of those 5 books of 2019 if I can get it finished. But that one is just my favorite, most relatable and really accessible stories, and even non-fantasy fans will pick that one up and read it and say they really, really enjoy it. So that one's my personal favorite.
And that is an epic fantasy. It's not a lit RPG.
Yeah. So it's just epic fantasy. It's similar to if Lord of the Rings only had humans. So if there were no elves or dwarves, if you just had a human version of Lord of the Rings and the epic journey and sort of the coming of age, soul searching kind of questions, and characters figuring out who they are, and that kind of thing. And it's really, I don't know, it's kind of touching in a way, I guess, which is weird to say about my own stuff, but that's what people tell me. So,
well, that's good that if you can pull that off,
yeah. Well, I've done it once out of, I don't know, 10 novels I've written, or 15 now.
All right. And you, I know at least some of your books, you're through Hydra, is that right?
I have 2 books with Hydra. So I while I do actually a ton of stuff with Hydra all the time, and actually just worked for Hydra this past year, and done all sorts of conventions and everything with Hydra, I actually only have 2 books with them. So the rest of my stuff, so I've got For We Are Many, one of my thrillers that I'm currently rewriting, is with Hydra, and then Shadowlith is with Hydra as well. And the rest of my stuff is actually all just self-published through myself. So that one's all me.
Yeah, that's cool. It's a lot more work, but you've got so much control.
Yeah, it's a lot more work. The biggest thing for me, of course, is the royalty split. So if I'm going to be selling thousands of copies of books, I want to be making 60 cents on the dollar versus 20 cents, and it's just a financial decision. Definitely.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm going to have links for all your contact info at the blurb.tv, but where can people find you, listeners on the podcast?
Yeah, StuartThamanBooks.com. That's the best way. So STUART and the last name THAMAN, and books.com. And you can find links to all my stuff there, including a bunch of free stuff, free short stories. I've got a free Choose Your Own Adventure novel on there as well. So if you remember those from growing up, they're a ton of fun. And mine is always an interesting one because you can choose which character in the story you want to play. And you can choose to play as the bad guy, harvesting high schoolers' souls for the devil. So it's a fun little adventure you can play right there on your browser, on your phone, wherever, right at StuartThamanBooks.com.
Well, that's pretty cool. I remember those. I used to get a lot of those.
Oh yeah, I've got a ton of them.
Yeah.
Yep, definitely.
That was a thing. What would that have been like? I don't know. Was that the mid '80s? Maybe that was kind of popular.
Yeah, I think that their heyday was really the early and mid '80s, and then I have a bunch of them that were old when I was getting them in the mid '90s. So yeah, those are fun.
Cool. Well, is there anything else you'd like to add or go into more detail?
I think we about covered it. So thanks for having me, for sure.
Oh, it's been great. It's been great to have you. I really appreciate you coming on, and I hope everyone will check out your new series when it comes out. And the series title is?
Yeah, so the series is Realm Online, and books 1 and 2 will be dropping this summer, probably sometime in May, and that'll be Oathbreaker and Citadel Death Gaze.
Okay, great. Thanks for coming, and I'll hopefully run into you soon.
Yeah, I'm sure we will.
All right.
If you enjoy the program, remember to hit like and subscribe so that you never miss an episode. And be sure to share this with all your friends. You can follow us on YouTube, Twitter, and your favorite podcatcher. You can support the show by visiting our sponsors, buying our merch, or shopping our affiliate links. As always, thanks for your support, and we'll see you next time.